Welcome to Capitals Uncovered, the Martin Seif and Helena Ross Taylor show, where we cover political and geopolitics, news, culture, and everything in between on both sides of the Atlantic. We try to bring in guests, top guests we've had, really, really excellent, really intelligent people, some of the most smartest people in the world. And we've got Robert Cibis with us today, who's a kind of friend from my previous incarnation. He was a very I'll have to say, when I last spoke to you, my line was cut off for about 3 hours because it was pinged by the BND or something. So, um, the because you were covering COVID and we were both, I talked to a lot of dissidents and all sorts of things happened. But I just give you're an acclaimed German film director, producer, and distributor, and you specialize in documentary films. You were trained at the Film Academy Baden-Württemberg and at the Sorbonne Nouvelle. You won a Franco-German Prize for Young Journalism, and you made films including a celebrated portrait of master piano tuners and the things that we talked about, which was your very, very critical documentaries about the WHO and the COVID handling in Germany, which got you into some hot water, didn't it, Robert?
Yes, exactly. I really changed, in a way, science. I went from camp one, mainstream media, to camp two, alternative media. And yeah, I couldn't help. I felt like I didn't change, it's just society which changed.
Yes, exactly.
Well, because it's a new show and a new audience, what were the main findings that got you so into trouble that you found out?
It's amazing because if you have a state of emergency, if obviously society can change or shift in a way that what you're allowed to ask and to question, to discuss is different. So the room, the space for debate has shrunken. It's smaller and smaller and smaller. And this is, of course, the beginning of war. What I am about to understand is that, if we say, okay, look, this is not really the liberal democracy we liked and we would love to live in, and we thought we would have lived in the past. Yes, because if you have less liberty, if you have less wealth, then you're moving towards a society in which power is more centralized. And this ultimate stage of the centralization of power is war. I needed some years to understand it. But in fact, if you have inflation, if you have, you don't have the right to ask this question, you don't have the right to ask, there's censorship in Europe, as you certainly know of, done in a way by sanctions, which are preemptive. All kinds of preemptive measures are by definition a limitation to liberties. So when you have all this is war against the population. This is war against the people. And I needed like 2 years to really grasp it in what it means specifically. But right at the beginning of the COVID crisis, already in April, I would say, I had this moment where I said, I don't understand anything. It's so weird. Why would nearly 200 countries in the world implement measures that are completely senseless? I spoke to 200 different worldwide renowned experts in epidemiology, and not even one could understand the measures. So obviously the measures were not medical but political. So if they were political, why would then, let's say, the government of Iran, the government of India, and the government of Morocco and Nepal and Spain and the United States implement the same illogical measures? So there is no easy answer to this. If you just see, okay, look, there's the West versus East, there's a new world order coming because countries like Brazil and India and China will have a more important place within the UN and within the global shifts in general. If you try to answer it this way, the answer must be wrong, because then what would they do? They would say, look, I am the president of Russia. I can tell you that this campaign to vaccinate healthy people with untested substances is, of course, a crime against these people. I would liberate the West from this oppression. Why wouldn't Putin say this. It's the best weapon you can have against, to subvert confidence in their governments. This is what I'm learning each day from mainstream media in Germany, which is that we shouldn't trust the Russian government. We shouldn't trust the Iranian government. They tell us lies, and they try to subvert, the trust in our government, which is true. The Russian media, for instance, would promote analytics saying that the measures in Berlin and Germany were not done in a correct way. They would criticize the German government, and often these critics are very well funded and completely correct. However, the fundamentals, the premise is not touched. And this is really impressive. So this then led me to say, who has this power? Who has this power to be able to implement a fictitious narrative in Iran, Russia, France, Canada, New Zealand, and so on and so forth. And it's a long way down the road. And then you see, okay, look, there's something I heard 20 years ago for the first time, but I didn't really understand what it means. I heard that, private banks can rent you money, they give you a credit. And then they can ask for interests. Okay, that there's a risk, maybe the person isn't paying back or something, and there's administrative work too, so why not have interests? But then I learned, this credit they give, in fact, they have the money is created in the moment when they give this credit, which obviously is a bit bizarre, because if I'm renting out film equipment to my friends and I ask them to pay for it, that it's fine for everybody because I bought it and I need to pay insurance and all of this. But the bank didn't, acquire this money. It just created in an administrative manner. So, and even the governments, when they get money, when they spend money, when they have debt, they need credit from a private bank. I mean, I heard this for the first time 20 years ago and said to myself, there must be something wrong about this. It can't be really true. I mean, who would accept this system? And, and today, and this is really because of the COVID crisis, I am certain, that mathematically it's true. Because if you have the system which in fact all transactions which are happening with money all over the globe, there is a portion of it which is paid to these owners of the private banks who can give credits, because in addition to what I just exposed, all money is created out of credit. I mean, all is not perfectly true. It's 95% or so, because central banks can print, the coins we use, but it's rather 3 to 5% and not more. But most, it's nearly all money is created this way. So this means that if you just make a graph, that at a certain point, all wealth, all property in the world belongs to the owners of the banks. There is no other way. So we can do great businesses, smart businesses. We can have big industries, but at the end, they will all belong to the same people, because over generations, they can have this portion of wealth every year, every day in their own pockets. Okay, so this is one big question.
What you're saying is incredible, and I hear it, but it doesn't. There's so much information coming into our minds, and I learned about this for a few years ago. I think around the time of the financial crisis, and it's so incredible. It needs to be sloganeered. People need to perhaps wake up and have it on their cornflakes packet. Money is created out of nothing, and the banks do it, and they get all the credit. I mean, they get the interest on it. But the point is, people assume that there's a downside or a risk or something, or if they're taking a gamble, and if they lose big time, or they're using their own assets. But they're not, because if they lose, the government bails them outright. So it's a one-way bet. They can't lose, and they can only win. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating that a bank can, in fact, become bankrupt. I
Yeah,
never understood how this works, but they can, and
right.
they have costs. And there is a central bank which is controlling, in a way, how credits are allocated. So it's a complicated system, but the complication is only there to put a veil on what is really happening so that we don't see the very simple core to it, which is that it's a scam.
Yeah.
It's a scam. It's the biggest scam in the history of mankind, and it's happening in a big scale, large scale manner for about 500 years, but it happened already before that. 1,000 years ago, you had similar scams too, but have it on a global level. This corresponds to the Enlightenment
I mean, the,
in
the
history.
idea is that banks get paid money in by the people who are lending money to the bank, people keeping it in deposit. But the point is, the banks only what's it called? I can't remember. It's fractional reserve banking, but they use far more money that they lend out than they take in. And I think it's only savings bank that or old building societies in the UK that do as much as they.
Yes, it's
So
it's
yeah.
completely crazy. I think in the United States, this fractional reserve has to be 0%, so that there don't need to be any. In
Oh,
Europe, I think there was a limit to 1% of the credits allocated. So it doesn't really matter in terms of, grasping what is really happening.
right,
So you have these are in a way, these 1%, let's say, or let's even if it's 2 or 3%, same as with the cash money coming from the central bank, these percentages are so low that they are kind of an anchor for the narrative that there is the money lended to others is in fact coming from the people who deposited
right,
amounts.
right.
But to see how power works, it is irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
And
So in a way, the lending into banks is irrelevant, and it only serves to bamboozle or a smoke screen, basically, because most people think, well, it's got to be somebody else's money, and banks are just conduits, but in fact, they're power centers. And does it, Martin? I don't know if you want to say something, but does this lead into your theory about war and central banks and creating credit to make war machinery? And
yeah,
yeah,
in
go on.
fact, I had a second, sorry if you,
Oh,
but I had a
please.
second question, which were also working in my mind for 20 years, which is why is war happening? If you run around, if you ask people, nobody wants war. And honestly, even if you have the case as in West Africa, where there's a conflict between Algeria and Morocco about West Sahara. So there is it's about they want to dominate this area. Okay, there's a conflict, but would these people kill for this? Would the people die for it? I mean, I don't think so. And very few people are willing to do this, and especially so why is it happening and where is it coming from? And there again, COVID helped me a lot to understand, because COVID was in fact a psychological operation which has been implemented from top down to down. So you had clearly um, it wasn't the people who wanted a crisis, and it wasn't the people who wanted to have a non-existent epidemic. Sorry for the non-existing. There's always respiratory diseases. However, there was no global epidemic which has been extraordinary. So, um, so where is it coming from? And again, why is it helping any states? Why is it helping companies? I often heard, oh, it's good for the industry, then they can sell more if everything is destroyed. I also heard, but I said, it's good for some people. The weapons industry, the arms industry is making a lot of money, so they are pushing for war. This is certainly true, but there are other lobbies too. You have,
Exactly.
I mean, I would love to have a lobby for every citizen of Europe having the right to a 10-room apartment. And I want to have also, 2 cars. I just, we are, there are many reasons to spend more money. And war isn't that logical. In fact, but if I have more wealth, I am more powerful. So this is something. which might be disturbing to others,
Mm.
because if you have this scam, if you have this system which is in fact fraudulent, people want the people who are profiting from the systems don't want others to come close to them to either see it or if they or and worse than that, see and discuss it and have the power to change something. So the richer you are, the more power you have. So if the bourgeoisie in the various countries is poorer, the smoke screen can maybe better survive if we are better educated, if we understand more things, if we read more books, if we have in this digital industry, this digital revolution is in fact a big threat to globalists because information flows like this. We have this video call right now, and it's possible because of this technology, and this technology is a problem to the owners of the banks. And so, why is there war? And in fact, yes, it's the only answer because war makes that people become poorer and that countries are in debt and that the debt is growing. And it, of course, makes that the field is even. So it destroys not just wealth, but also culture. And it creates a space to reshape societies, and it makes the leverage over societies bigger.
Mm.
So this is what I'm understanding. And you had this, example of Lebanon. In Lebanon, I think the prime minister has been called Harari, and he was killed, and Lebanon had no debt. Then came a new guy who worked at Goldman Sachs. The new prime minister made debt, and the country was in the system.
Mm.
And just to finish on this, why would a company like Microsoft have, let's say, $500 million on the bank account in cash, and at the same time have $500 million of debt?
Mm.
It doesn't make sense, does it?
No.
And I heard people saying who worked in the US administration that this is because they have to play the game. If they have no debt, they wouldn't. It's
That's
it's a
exactly
means
right.
to subordinate. It's a way to pay to the mafia.
Oh, I see. Yeah, but well, Martin, I mean, I know you've worked many years inside the with the White House and the State Department and so on. Is this are people? Is this the way the world works from your White House knowledge perspective?
Not totally, no, but to a very significant degree, yes. I mean, I agree with you, Robert. I think Robert's analysis is brilliant and frightening and terrifying. And well, incidentally, we must have you back because this is such an enormous topic and you have such insights into it. I really feel we're only going to be entering into it here, and there's so much more to explore. But if you look back on the history of the Federal Reserve was created by Woodrow Wilson during World War One. They seem to have a good argument for it, theoretically. The argument is to ease out the cycles of capitalism, which cause catastrophic suffering and collapses every 30 or 50 years or so. So people buy into it. They buy into it for the same reason they buy into the COVID lockdown. I was very struck by your analysis on that. People think, and even many of the architects delude themselves on this too. But the opposite happens, just as you point out with the COVID factor. Within 5 years of the Federal Reserve System being launched, within 5 years, America has the greatest crash in history in 1919, 1920, and it is a direct result of miscalculations by the Fed. This has been explored in vast detail. They got everything wrong. They expected certain projections. They got it totally wrong.
I disagree. Sorry, Martin. I
No,
disagree.
please come in.
I disagree because I think, yes, it was a disaster for the American population, and not only because it was the same for the people in Germany.
Oh, yeah.
Subsequently, you had the economic crisis swept over the whole world. But these disasters are created, and these disasters are war against the people. Because, because again, remember what I think it is the truth. The truth is people shouldn't know, shouldn't discuss. And the more educated people are, and the better the rest of the economy is thriving, the more the system is endangered, the system of exploitation by credit. And and if you want to change society, if you want to have get rid of the structure as it is and want to create a new one, destruction is the only efficient means. Think of the Cultural Revolution in China. It was necessary to build a completely new system, and it's a country with 5,000 years of history, great history, and a very hierarchical and deeply funded society. They had to kill 60 million people so to have the place for a centralized communist regime. I'm just making this comparison because in the United States, to have it more, the system as centralized as it is, as cruel as it is, and the inequality between the richest and the poorest as big as it is, I think that these crises have been engineered because you can prove that central banks can in fact help any population to thrive if they want to, because they can inject credits which help societies and economies to grow.
Wow.
I have agree with you and have disagree with you, Robert, because I do agree with you that many of these things are launched by deliberate policies. But I think I've had much more experience than you in dealing with these people as individuals face to face over a long sustained period of time. And for me, the most terrifying factor is I have no doubt there are diabolical geniuses like a Soros or three or a dozen of them hanging in the background. But what's truly frightening is when you see people like Summers and so many others, they aren't that bright. They get the most fundamental. Exactly. I mean, we see this in Iran, whether it's deliberate provocation of war with Iran. They want war with Iran. They are war with Iran, but they don't know what they're going to get. It is going to explode out of control. So you are right. They do these things. They want change, but then the change gets out of hand. One thing I want to add here, and again, this isn't a disagreement with you or disproof of you, but it's kind of apparently half a disagreement, but apparently also half a full agreement with you. And that is how the United States government responded to the 1920 Depression, which began off far more violently and seemed much more frightening, even though the Great Depression of 1929, 1930 was. The plunge under Wilson in 1919, 1920 was an unbelievable catastrophe. And you are right, it was a direct result of deliberate American policy from the Fed. Now, there are different interpretations of this. Your interpretation is they masterminded it. My one, following Adam Tolles and other mainstream historians, is they didn't deliberately mastermind it, or whether they thought they were handling it this way. They got their numbers wrong. They totally screwed up. Either way, it was a total mess up, a catastrophe. But what was the response to it? There was a very interesting response, which I think in a way confirms some of your insights too. And that is one of the most right-wing and reviled capitalists in American history. Secretary of the Treasury for 12 years, Andrew Mellon, comes in under President Warren Harding. And he brings in policies strongly backed by Harding, who had been a businessman himself, that liquidate the Great Depression of 1920 almost immediately. And how do they do it? They do it with Joseph Schumpeter type economics. They say, let the market find its own value, liquidate everything. Bankruptcies are horrible, but they're less bad than not letting them happen. Let everything crash and everything be built up again. Now, there's a lot of arguments, humane arguments, serious arguments, social democratic arguments you can make against this policy. And I think many of them are legitimate ones. But in macroeconomic terms, it worked. People were back at work. The suffering of literally more than 100 million people, and many others, of course, stayed in massive poverty, given the realities of American society and life at the time. But by 1921, America had started the longest boom of sustained prosperity in its own and in world history. But by contrast, in 1930, you have Herbert Hoover, very misunderstood man. And I'm not an admirer of Hoover, to put it mildly, but Hoover was highly critical of capitalism and of the free market. And therefore, he had exactly the opposite response to Harding and to Mellon. He said, he did what the Emperor Diocletian did before, when Richard Nixon did after him. He brought in a price freeze. Prices are going to be frozen, and they were, and wages are going to be frozen. They were. We're not going to let wages drop because we want to protect people's well-being. Now, there may have been many involved in this who were secretly knew better that it wouldn't work, but that isn't the way I see it in my assessment. All the major economists of right and left at the time, except for the Austrian free market ones, supported the Hoover approach on this. But then Hoover makes it worse with the Smoot-Hawley tariff. Now, what's interesting with the Smoot-Hawley tariff is there is no pressure from economists or business to do it. They oppose the tariff because they want free trade. And there wasn't full free trade in America anyway, but the Smoot-Hawley tariff was the biggest constriction and protectionist measure ever. And in general, I am an enlightened protectionist, but you can bring any apparently good policy philosophically to an extreme degree. You know, socialism is one thing with the Labour Party in Britain in the 20th century. It was another with the Nazis. It's something much more admirable and different with the great social democratic parties in Germany since World War II. You know, labels cover very different things that can be both good and bad. So in 1930, prices are frozen in America, wages are frozen, and the Great Depression lasts a decade. And then you get a social democratic leader in who opposes Wall Street, who is hated by Wall Street, but things get worse. Then you get John Maynard Keynes visits Roosevelt in 1935-36, and I am a great respecter and admirer of Keynes. And in America, of course, everybody hates Keynes. To them, Keynes is a one-worlder, he's a Satanist, which he is not in real life, but they are totally paranoid about Keynes, utterly paranoid about Keynes. And Keynes is regarded as in America as the great archenemy of free market capitalism. And he is a social democrat in Britain. He supports the Labour Party. He supports humane social democratic policies. But what does he tell Franklin Roosevelt? He says, you cannot have recovery in America until you restore business confidence. And you are standing in the way of business confidence. You are demonizing business. And until you stop demonizing business, your depression will get worse rather than better. And FDR ignores some of this. And previously he had taken Keynes' advice on inflationary policies to reflate the economy, which had not solved the fundamental problems, but had brought a relief to scores of millions of people. You know, it goes both ways. But what do you get from this?
Sorry,
you get the Roosevelt
Robert
depression
wants to say something, Martin.
Yeah,
we try and connect it to so we have one kind of conversation where Robert. I mean, does Martin make sense with what you're saying? And because I'm the non-economist here, and I'm trying to connect what you're saying about central banks with. I mean, Martin's basically saying that. Are you saying that free market policies were not tried sufficiently, and there was too much control of the economy, and that's what failed? Is that what you're saying, Martin? And how does that relate to the central banks?
Well, yes, different policies at different times. There are times when you must have more centralized policies, but at other times when it's usually urgently vital to loosen things up. But right. I'm not talking about in general theoretical terms. I'm talking about the specific conditions of what worked in 1920 and what didn't work in the 1930s. But my most fundamental point is actually full agreement with Robert, which is the evil of central banks.
Right.
Central banks are very sinister, and if you have them, they will be abused automatically. And even if you had the most idealistic, supposedly, people in charge, they will make things much worse rather than better. So at the end of the day, whatever we argue on about specifics and this and that, I am very much with you, Robert. Thank you, Penny, for letting me say it. I am very much with you, Robert, on your fundamental point. I think having central banks is central to the whole problem, and it makes things infinitely worse. And the best thing we could do would be to eliminate all central banks.
Right. So just Robert, I mean, Martin, if America didn't have a central bank throughout this 20th century that you were describing, would the outcomes have been better regardless of what the other policies were?
They
Or
would have been
Robert, I'm sorry,
different.
I'll allow you to answer. Or
Yeah.
you pick up where Martin was saying, and if you followed his argument and where it relates to yours.
Of course, as I explained, the system itself is a scam. It's mafia. It's
Yes.
nothing but mafia. And they kill if you don't follow. They kill prime ministers, they kill presidents if they don't make enough debt. And they make wars if
Yes.
there's not enough debt.
Oh, I agree.
So what Martin has been describing so well is that, of course, there are different ways to organize economy, the different ways to organize society. And,
Yes.
and this is a very important and correct debate, which, however, is in another dimension. You have, if I would say, you have this left, right, this debate on how to organize life. Would you give free universities? Would people need to pay for it? It's an important debate. Both, there are reasons for both. But if you where is the money coming from? Who is creating money? Who has the right to print money? It's on a different level. It's not a left-right thing. It's and the way it's organized right now, centralized in the hands of private people, of just people. If I print euros at home, I'll go to prison. And if Mr. X is printing the same euros, a private guy, he is in fact in all boards of all big corporations and is telling to the prime minister what to do. So that is not fair. This is what it's about.
But Robert, so who?
Exactly.
I mean, who are the private people behind these central banks? I mean, I knew it, but I don't know nearly as much as you do.
The thing is, I might know 3 or 4 names, but look, I think in this class of society who are co-owning the big banks, there must be about 8,000 people. I heard this number, and they know each other very well. They're in the same clubs. They're like me. I know
Exactly.
every documentary filmmaker in Germany. I knew them all because we have a kind of association, and we meet.
Exactly.
And we meet at the festivals and so on, and it's the same. There are about 1,000 documentary filmmakers in Germany, and there are about 8,000 big owners of big banks. And of course, they do own much more than big banks. They own a big share in the industry. And of course, one of the biggest owners of a bank is the Rockefeller family. But as we all know, they became big because they had a monopoly on oil. So but then they're in that system. And of course, monopolies in general are the best way. If you have one monopoly, you try to build up others.
Exactly.
And so what we have, in fact, what COVID is proof of, is that the whole world is, in fact, slipping out of any market
Yes.
into private-private partnerships, which are, in fact, monopolies. And they're just hidden. If you just look at who owns Pepsi and who owns Coca-Cola, and they're the same owners, it's a monopoly. It's a stupid example, but you could get gazillions.
And
of
so do
examples.
all the central banks have the same owners, basically? They're intertwined ownerships.
Yes, that's correct. I mean, it's I cannot explain the details of it. I mean, there are wonderful debates to have on, how social societies should be organized, how economics should work. Are there regulations necessary, or would you just have it all free, and so on and so forth? Where does the liberty of my life end? Where does yours start? These are very important discussions, and they have to be held all day long to improve how it's worked, how the society works. However, what we've been just discussing is on a completely different level. It's not a matter of right and left wing and, socialist or social. No, the words are stolen, as you just said, Martin. It's very, very insightful because the words, are just taken over, and then
Yes,
the concept
exactly.
itself is blurred to its opposite.
Exactly, Robert.
Communism comes from the word commune, which means a clan, the little entity of society, which is the opposite to central control of huge countries. It's anti-communist if you have a government deciding over the destiny of millions of people, just to give a simple example. So no, the money scam is on a different level. It's not,
Yes.
and it's just at the point where the room for debate ends normally. And I think it is up to us free media people to say, look, we can discuss everything, and prove me wrong. Prove me wrong with what I'm saying. And if not, let's explore. Because the good thing about the world crisis right now is that we have to discuss everything. Because obviously the
Exactly.
system goes towards self-destruction. So if you have a self-destructive society, that's the moment to ask questions, to raise awareness about fundamentals. And you say, maybe these premises are not really that, good to just keep. We should question it
Exactly.
all. And this comes, and we have proof for it all day long. I think, it's interesting. Sorry to intermingle everything,
No.
but what you just said is, we discuss geopolitics, we discuss media world, we discuss censorship, but the compatibilization, if of the discourse is in fact the problem. You cannot understand geopolitics if you don't understand the economic
I
machine.
agree. I
You cannot
completely agree.
understand censorship if you don't understand it. At the end, the question is who has control, who decides, and at the end, just follow the money. Yeah, that's as simple as this.
Yes, exactly.
And a lot of things are blurred between and then you have, sorry for the noise, but then you have also sometimes you mix tools and systems. You know, um, I mentioned already the Cultural Revolution in China. Um, I just had an interesting conversation with some critic of Islamism, and we just found out that in fact the installation of the Islamistic regime in Iran is in fact the same thing. It's a cultural revolution that destroyed thousands of years of history of Persia in,
Oh,
in
yes, yes.
having this top-down hierarchy which eliminates all variations of subculture and regionalism, and which was in fact then permitting centralized power. So the religion is a tool to oppress people, as can be an ideology
Yes,
similar to communism, and
yes,
it can be the climate fear. It can be a lot of different things. And a narrative can be a tool, and whether this whether this fear of something is justified or not doesn't really matter. You can amplify it in a way that it becomes
exactly.
enormous and a means to subjugate. So where am I running to? I'm saying that, in fact, I think in 2020 a world war started. I think that COVID was the big military psyop which had the aim to build a central government. And the narrative of having a worldwide disease spreading is, in fact, the best narrative to give a subliminal, at least, reason to say, look, we need central coordination because a disease can be at the same time everywhere. So we need global institutions to take care of this. And they need enough power to then have the capacity to react fast. We cannot have a parliament debate for days and weeks about any decision. We need policymakers on a global level because there are pandemics. This narrative is in fact the best basis, is the carpet to then go further on towards a global government, which is not called this way because it doesn't sound that nice. They say global governance, and no, they don't want a government. It's just a way of coordinating ourselves. But it's the same thing with the European Union. We were never told we have a European government in Germany. They just said, oh no, we have this to facilitate economic exchange, and then we need also more cultural exchange. We shouldn't give everything to the United States. We have to see French films in Germany and German films in France and so on and so forth. But no, at the end, what we have right now is in fact that most debates in national parliaments are in fact just a prolongation of decisions which have been already taken by the
Yes.
Commission, by the
Yes,
European.
exactly. Oh, yes, absolutely.
So this is all to say we have a global tendency towards centralization of power,
Mm.
and everything we discuss is either tool to go towards this aim, or in fact the system itself which permits to go there. And at the same time, we see so much destruction that I myself, went down that road, but a lot of people became so critical of the fundamentals that I see there's also a big opportunity to have the room of debate exploding.
Mm.
And this is what I wish, and this is why I'm so happy you are making this show and others are doing the similar
Exactly.
rethinking approaches. Radical thinking and radical solutions
Exactly.
um, might be useful.
Robert, I'll wind up and then I'll throw it over to Martin and I'll wind up again. But two things. One is that it's very interesting what you're saying about the COVID response was the same in all countries. So, it became very fashionable to talk about BRICS in around 2022 and the China Russia axis versus the West or whatever. But 2 years before, lest we forget, everyone was on the same page. I mean, the Russians were, and as you said very early on, it's worth remembering that the Russians had a fantastic opportunity there to, if they were our adversarial, they're trying to win the culture war, they're trying to win the
Exactly.
war of public opinion to show that they're on the good guys and we're the bad guys. Well, they could have exploded all the COVID myths using Russia today, but they're very quiet about that, and they went more or less along with all the whole vaccination campaign thing. And so I've had Russian guests on who said things like, "Well, you think it's Putin versus the West. They're all part. It's like two cheeks of the same bum, or whatever you want to say vulgarly. I mean, it's like they're all the same, and there's some higher power
Yes.
that commands all of them. So in a way, this whole war thing is a kind of collaboration or something, and that Putin is a secret neoliberal globalist as well. So
No.
that's worth thinking about. But but the other thing I wanted to say was, I mean, my pragmatic Anglo approach would be, do we need banks at all? And I mean, is there a way to avoid throwing out the baby with the bathwater of the central banks? I mean, presumably creating credit is important for some activities, right? I mean, uh, you know, uh,
Oh, sure.
you need to borrow money. I mean, you need to get it down to basics. Why do we borrow money? It's to start up businesses, and then we pay back from our profits,
I borrow money often from people who just earned that money.
right? So
That's
basically a savings bank
uh,
type
it
system.
happens. It happens, and I also give people money to, and then they give it back to me. So this works. The question is, who has the right to create money? Because money is convenient to have. I'm not against money. I'm against debt money.
Mm,
Exactly.
The question is, I think, and I think Martin mentioned the Austrians. I think that Hayek and his group, in fact, promoted the idea of having a free market of currencies. So, which means
Exactly.
um, I can print money as everybody can. I can be my bank, but who would then, borrow my money and pay me interest on it? I would need to give something, I need to give guarantees. Like this money is worth 20% of my next documentary. And then I print it, it's a credit or and then if they trust me as a film producer and if they trust the film to be good, then you take it and use it as a means of exchange. And so if they had a free market of money and everybody could have it, and then there would be a competition to give real value toward
Exactly.
any kind of exchange paper. And
very
if there's no
Exactly.
interesting.
value, the paper would be worth less. So,
Right.
if I'm a bad filmmaker, nobody wants to have a share of my documentary, and they wouldn't like to exchange papers. Oh, this is a 5% of my documentary, something. So, but everybody could print it. If there's a great corporation and they're doing great product, everybody loves them, and they have their tokens giving out, and it corresponds to a share of their product. Why not exchange the share of a car instead of having cars to exchange just to buy
Exactly.
a house? It's so there's no reason not to have a free market of currencies, in my
Exactly.
opinion. Others are saying, oh, look, if the state printed the money, it would be better. I think it's much better than it is now. It would be a much better solution than to have selected private people having the right to print money, which is an absurdity. But still, I think there is we lived it all. We lived it with COVID. The state can be extremely corrupted, and it would give a lot of power to the state. Why? It doesn't make the economy smoother if they print it. I think everybody should be able to print it.
I think I'm going to say if I bought a share in your business and then I went to the supermarket, how would I persuade them to take the money?
Oh, if they know me, if they know
Okay.
somebody would.
Maybe that's sort of what happened before in the old days. I mean, in the medieval ages or something, and
Oh,
we
no,
had a barter economy.
do you underestimate the logic? If I would take it, let's say, if if I know somebody else would give me something for it.
Right.
Of course, if it's like a share into if something which is very universal, everybody can relate to, it's easier than if it's a small film production company. But still, within the world of of these filmmakers, it can be worth something, you
Mm,
know. So yeah, it will be a hard market, and if you have nothing to offer, I mean, it will be difficult. But
mm,
if people can be sure, let's say, if it's like something more easy, like gold and silver, instead of having shares in the
very
documentary,
interesting.
it's of course simpler, and it's more universal. But it's still, let's say, if they're exaggerating and want to have too much value for this gold, then you can still go to other means of exchange.
Martin, how would you, what's one final question from you?
No, actually, not a question, but an invitation. Robert, come back again because you have actually already preempted my question. I wanted to ask, and you have already answered it. What is the philosophical alternative? How do we dial the clock back? Because as I emphasize again, I fully agree with your insight that the centralization of economic power and debt is an ongoing monster that's out of control black hole, and it is devouring us all. And therefore, for me, the fundamental response to this, and you have are starting to lead us along this path, is how do we reverse the process? And this is an enormous, and I would argue, phased process, but that's something I would love to explore with you on a sequel show, probably more than one sequel show.
Mm.
That we could not I would should we do it with one chaotic big bang, or should we have a phased approach to this, which is my own preference, but perhaps that is wrong. Or do we need to be much more loose and pragmatic, which would be much more in, as you say, the Austrian tradition? And like you, philosophically, from a fundamental position, I'm very much, my fundamental position is the more freedom and decentralization and free market we get, the better. The one last point I would add is I think this analysis you're talking about comes much more naturally in America and in Germany, perhaps in Sweden too, but much less so in Britain and France,
Mm.
because Germany is traditionally a federal society, was before, even during the Second Reich, has been again superbly so since 1949 in modern times. And America is at its best when it is federal, by which we mean not just a powerful federal center. It has become far too powerful and centralized, but the strength and necessity of the states as well. But in Britain, you never had this.
Mm.
You had Scotland and Ireland, Wales.
True.
Now,
The other
I'm sorry, I'm going too
No,
much
but I
here,
mean,
but
my
please come
my
back
interesting
soon,
topic is
Robert.
the Americans are Germans who speak English, right?
Because we force them to.
That's
Because
Um,
we force everybody
in
else to
one
assimilate.
1914, yeah.
insight to what you just said, Martin. Keynes was a co-owner of the Bank of England.
Ah, yes,
And
of course.
initially, he was critical of central banks, but it changed throughout his life.
Yeah,
So
the
this
more
might
power
be,
he got, the more he was in favor of having that power.
yeah,
All
in
right,
Cambridge.
Robert. In the meantime, do you want to launch onto new? I think our viewers' brains are probably exploding at this point. So, um, What can we find your stuff in the meantime? I mean, probably you're working on this topic and it'll take some time. Is there anything you want to show? Any flag up?
I'm
Yeah.
publishing regularly all kinds of content, articles, videos, documentaries in various European languages, also in English, Spanish, French, German, and Italian. I would be extremely grateful if the audience subscribed to our platform because
Right.
I need money to go on, and I have it's a big effort to pay the team to move forward. It's an 8-part series for the moment, 8 parts, 30 minutes, and we are in the editing process. But it'll take another 2 months or so.